Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm Patricia O'Connell. I'm the Product Success Manager for Barrington Nutritionals, and I'm here today to introduce an exciting new ingredient called Bioglena. And here with me is Dr. Tali Penchenik-Jowers. She's with Salabia Algatech Nutrition, and she'll tell you all you need to know about Bioglena. Dr. Tali, would you please begin?
Absolutely. Thank you, Patricia. Hello to anybody and everybody listening. I'm very excited to talk to you today about Bioglena. Bioglena is natural all algae. It's rich in beta-glucan, a unique immune support ingredient. It is brought to you by Salabia Algatech Nutrition, a leading global supplier in the dietary supplement and food industries. Bioglena. Bioglena is 100% natural, whole Euglena gracilis alga, containing a minimum of 55% linear, one-free beta-glucan, complete protein, and essential vitamins and minerals. Bioglena is produced by a proprietary fermentation technology for high beta-glucan content. Now, as I said, Bioglena is a winning immune support ingredient. So before we start speaking about Bioglena, I do want to give a very brief overview of immunity and our immune system. So our immune system obviously protects the body from disease. It is critical for survival as well as our quality of life. It's been known for a very, very long time that our mental health and physical health are inseparable for well-being, but more and more we are also recognizing that the importance of immune health in that. So basically immune health and physical health and mental health, they all feed into each other, they even regulate each other, and we need all of them at their best to achieve the optimal well-being that we all deserve. A few words about phases of immunity. So when a pathogen, a disease-causing factor enters our body, the first phase of our immune response is innate immunity. Innate immunity is characterized by being immediate, it is non-specific, it recognizes conserved pathogen-associated patterns. I'll speak a little bit more about it later on in the presentation. It has both cellular components, for example, a type of cell called macrophage. It has humoral components, for example, cytokines, which are basically immune signaling molecules. And very importantly, it informs adaptive immunity. So the second phase of our immune response is adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity is characterized by having a lag time between exposure to the pathogen until maximal response, give or take a few days. It is very pathogen specific. It also has cellular components, for example, T cells. It has humoral components, for example, antibodies. And importantly, it can establish immunological memory. A few words about cytokines. Basically, our immune cells communicate by cytokines. Cytokines are the signaling molecules that are produced by immune cells. They regulate both innate and adaptive immunity, so all the phases of our immune response. And one scenario, one very simplified scenario regarding cytokines is depicted here. We have a pathogen being recognized by a macrophage, our innate, one of the stars of innate immunity. The macrophage will secrete cytokines, which will inform and regulate the activity of T cells from the adaptive immune response. And then these T cells will be activated into exerting an antipathogenic effect. A very important aspect of immunity that is more and more appreciated is that immune health is very much about balanced immunity. We want to achieve maximum effectiveness with minimum damage. Pretty clearly, if a person is immune deficient, that person will be vulnerable to infections and disease. But on the other side, Immune overactivity is also problematic and can result in tissue damage and allergic reaction and other illnesses. So really, we want balance. That's what we're aiming for in immune health. Another key understanding of how the immune system works is that the gut is the key immune site. The gut is rich in innate immune cells that continuously monitor everything that passes through the gut. So after that semi-brief introduction, we arrive at Bioglena. And so finally, I get to introduce to you what are beta-glucans and what is Euglena gracilis. So let's start with beta-glucans. Beta-glucans naturally occur in cereals, in yeast, in fungi, and in microalgae. Beta-glucans are polysaccharides, which are basically chains of glucose units bound together. There are over 12,000 published studies about the different types of beta-glucans, and they are best known as immunomodulators, that is, molecules that can affect immune function. There are different sources of beta-glucans. Our favorite is, of course, microalgae. Microalgae produce linear beta-glucans, which are recognized for their ability to immune modulate. Yeast also produce beta-glucans. These beta-glucans are characterized by having long side chains, and they are also known for immune modulation. Fungi also produce beta-glucans with chains, but those chains are much shorter than the ones we see for beta-glucans from yeast, also recognized for immune modulatory functions. And finally, we have beta-glucans from cereals. These have their basic chain has a somewhat different chemical structure than the beta-glucans from the other sources I've introduced. They are recognized for immune effect such as cholesterol and cardiovascular health, but no immune modulatory effect. Euglena gracilis. Euglena gracilis is a next generation source of beta-glucans. It's a single-celled microalga. It is rich in nutrients. It produces linear beta-1,3 glucan that is called paramylon. So when I say paramylon, it's beta-glucan from Euglena gracilis. Paramylon serves as the algae's energy storage and is stored as free-floating granules within the cells. These are these white blobs here. And specifically in our product, in Bioglena, there is 55% paramylon, which is achieved by a proprietary fermentation technology. Just very quick characteristics of Bioglena: 100% natural, unprocessed, whole microalgae source of beta-glucan, over 55% beta-glucan, absolutely no additives or solvents. It is suitable for the whole family for daily use. Recommended dosage for dietary supplement is 375 milligrams daily, and in food products up to 450 milligrams per serving. And it's a science-based immune support ingredient. Beta-glucans in general support our immune system, immune response by a few mechanisms through trained immunity, which I will introduce, priming of key immune cells, activation of immune cascades, and ultimately support of innate and adaptive immune health. Paramylon specifically is recognized by immune receptors. In fact, our immune system has evolved to recognize beta-glucans as they are found on the cell surface of disease-causing fungi. Beta-glucans, including paramylon, are specifically recognized by cellular receptors, therefore activating immune cells. Here we see a macrophage with its particular receptors that see and recognize and bind beta-glucan. This causes immune activation, cytokine secretion, and ultimately for this cell, immune training. So what is this immune training that I've mentioned already twice? Well, trained immunity is a newly identified immune mechanism that is very exciting and very much changing the way we understand immunity and how it works. So if we have here, basically trained immunity occurs when beta-glucans bind to immune cells. So here you have a macrophage and it is binding here a beta-glucans. This binding transforms the macrophage into a primed cell or a trained cell. When this cell will encounter a pathogen, it will respond more powerfully than a non-primed cell. For example, it will secrete more cytokines. And you can see it in this graph. We have a resting macrophage, no response. Upon binding a beta-glucan, it will secrete cytokines. It will then revert back to a resting state, but this time it is a primed or trained cell. When it encounters a real threat, when it will encounter a pathogen, it will have a more powerful response than a non-trained cell. Paramylon specifically induces trained immunity in macrophages. I'm going to present to you a study that was done on animal macrophages that were first trained or stimulated with paramylon, followed by a bacterial mimic. So we had these cells, these macrophages, incubated together with paramylon for 1 day, allowed to rest for 6 days, and then into the growth media was introduced a bacterial mimic, so basically a molecule that makes the cells think that there's a pathogen present. Now, if we compare here cells that were not trained by beta-glucans but did see the bacterial mimic, they will secrete cytokines, in this case, a cytokine called TNF-alpha. Interestingly, when cells that have been first trained by paramylon see this bacterial mimic, i.e. they think there's a pathogen present, they will secrete significantly more TNF-alpha, significantly more cytokine than cells that have not been trained. And here the training was done specifically by paramylon. So Bioglena, what's the overall course of it in our body? So when one takes Bioglena, it is easily digested in the stomach. And the beta-glucans, as I told you, because they're free floating within the cell, once the algae is digested, they are just released from within the algae. They reach the small intestine, where the macrophages that continuously monitor everything that passes through the gut, the macrophages recognize, bind, pick up, they themselves swallow some beta-glucans, and they leave the gut and they shuttle throughout the body to key immune sites. Ultimately, this leads to beta-glucans supporting natural, innate, and adaptive immune responses. Some clinical studies. In this clinical study, the relationship between Euglena gracilis and upper respiratory tract infection symptoms was examined. In this study, it was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study on active and healthy adults who were asked to take a Euglena gracilis supplement for 90 days. And the participants were asked to fill in questionnaires about their health, specifically relating to respiratory symptoms. And as you can see here, the participants in the group supplementing with Euglena gracilis reported significantly less days in which they felt sick. And this was true after 30 days of supplementing with Euglena gracilis as it was after 90 days of supplementation. These participants also reported fewer symptoms and fewer days in which they felt these symptoms. Okay, as I said before, there is a tight relationship between immunity and well-being, and actually 2 studies looked at aspects of well-being. One of them is fatigue, which we can all, I'm sure, understand from our day-to-day life. In this study, it was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study where healthy adults, but reporting fatigue sensation in daily life, were asked to supplement with Euglena gracilis. And what we see is that people who supplemented with Euglena gracilis reported a reduction, as you can see, this is a minus here, a reduction in their sensation of physical fatigue. Interestingly, there was also a reduction in their feeling of mental fatigue. And overall, there was a trend of improved well-being or feeling less fatigued overall. There were also, so Euglena gracilis supplementation also resulted in higher levels of work efficiency, and in the tests that were done in this study, and higher levels of serum antioxidant levels. Another study, which was placebo-controlled crossover double-blind, again, healthy adults who were asked to supplement with Euglena gracilis and fill in questionnaires about quality of life. What was seen is that the group that supplemented with Euglena gracilis, so rather than the group, after supplementing with Euglena gracilis, the participant had reported there was an improvement in their physical component summary. This was not significant, but a strong trend, and they showed significantly better reporting in their mental health component in this survey. There are some animal studies as well of Euglena gracilis and paramylon and their relationship with our immune system. In this first study, looked at in a mouse model. What happened in this study was that mice, their diet was supplemented with Euglena gracilis, and after 14 days of feeding on a diet with Euglena gracilis, they were infected with influenza. And the results showed that in comparison to the control group, mice on Euglena gracilis containing diet exhibited markedly improved survival rate, higher cytokines amounts, and significantly lower virus quantity in the lungs. This is, of course, an animal model, but it is very interesting. In another study, the researchers looked at Euglena gracilis and inflammation. And in this case, again, the Euglena gracilis was included in the animals in the mice diet, where on 7 days after introducing the Euglena gracilis into the diet, the researchers induced skin inflammation. And what they saw is that in comparison to the control group, mice on the paramylon containing diet, exhibited inhibition of skin lesions development, reduction in quantity of inflammatory cells in the skin lesions, and a reduction in cytokine levels in the skin lesions. I should say that inflammation is an important part of our immune response to infection. However, if inflammation occurs by mistake, then inflammatory conditions can ensue. And finally, on the study front, I want to show another study that again looked at inflammation, and this time not in the skin, but in the joints. And in this mouse study, again, Euglena gracilis or paramylon, in fact, was included in the diet, and an inflammation was induced in the joints of these animals. And what was seen was that in comparison to the control group, mice on gracilis or paramylon in their diet had reduced joint inflammation symptoms and reduced cytokine secretion in the joint. And overall, joint symptom score was reduced when supplemented. And the last thing I want to say is that Euglena gracilis really is a next generation source of natural unprocessed beta glucan. And this is basically because of the source that we're using, that is Euglena gracilis. So in very common sources of beta glucan, that is fungal and yeast, beta glucans are only 15% of the cellular mass, and they serve as a structural component. So if this is the cell wall of the yeast or the fungi, the beta glucans are chemically bound within the cell wall. And therefore, to extract them, you need to use very harsh extraction processes. This is very different to the case in Euglena gracilis, where Solabi Algatech is able to grow this microalgae so that it has 55% of the cell mass being beta-glucans. But the core biology of this alga means that here the beta-glucans are not structural, they're an energy storage, and therefore they're naturally stored freely within the cell. So there's no need to process or extract, no need to use any additives. You digest the algae and the beta-glucans are naturally released. I think, Patricia, that we can move on and hear some questions.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Dr. Talley. That was amazing. The Bioglena is most certainly, especially in these times, a welcome addition to the natural products ingredients. And I do have some questions. One of the things that we touched on was the unprocessed part. So it's truly just a whole algae. Is that right? There's no processing, there's no extraction, there's no harsh chemicals that are added to bring it to market?
Absolutely. I can tell you that in Algatech, I have two hats. I both do science supports and I help a lot with the regulatory work, and I love Bioglena with both my hats because it's just a single, it really is a single ingredient. It's just we grow the microalgae, we dry it, and that's it. It's this powder, which is it's almost like flour, is ready to be taken. You don't need to do any, you don't need to add anything, you don't need to process it in any way. I love the composition certificates that I have for it, because it is actually 100% Euglena gracilis. That's it, one line. It is absolutely lovely and straightforward ingredient.
That's wonderful, because as we know, we're learning so much more about the dangers of additives in our food supply. So that's really exciting news. Tell me a little bit about the cell membrane. My understanding is that the function of the paramylon, the beta-glucan inside of the Euglena, it's not the same as it is for the other sources. I think the other sources are tied up in a cell wall. Can you touch on that for a second?
Absolutely. I think that's what makes Euglena gracilis really so exciting. So traditionally, yeast and fungi were used as beta-glucan sources, basically because they were available and people knew how to grow them. But by no means are they the best. They're far from being the best source for beta-glucans, because what beta-glucans do for yeast and fungi, in fact, yeast and fungi have a cell membrane, but they also have a cell wall. They have this extra component to their cells to protect them. To begin with, Euglena gracilis doesn't even have a cell wall, which is why we can digest it so easily. In our stomach, it just gets digested very quickly. That is in contrast to yeast and fungi. And with yeast and fungi, indeed, the beta-glucans are chemically bound. They're a structural component. They're a brick. They're one type of brick within the cell wall. And so to make the beta-glucans available to human, you need to perform very harsh extraction processes. With the Euglena gracilis, it's very different. It is not a structural component, it's energy storage, so it is free floating within the cell. So upon digestion, it's just released and continues on its way from the stomach to the intestine, where macrophages, so immune cells, can start recognizing it.
Awesome. That is, I love microalgae.
Yes,
absolutely. And I think that the cell membrane, it's truly, as I understand it, also quite nutritious. So it's 55% is beta-glucan, but the remaining portions, isn't there some amino acids and vitamins in there?
Yes, so the whole algae, like many whole products, is very nutritious. And yes, you have whole protein, you have minerals, and you have vitamins within it, which Euglena gracilis produces naturally because it produces it for itself. So we just enjoy this bounty.
And it's safe for daily use, as I understand it.
It is absolutely safe for daily use for the whole family, in fact.
And it's vegetarian.
It is vegetarian. Yes, it's a microalgae. So and there's the growth medium is very standard for growing microalgae. So for all those of us, many of us who are very worried for being ethical with what they eat, there's absolutely no worries here.
Okay, so Bioglena supports the natural process within our own bodies that we've come to understand as trained immunity. It's a vegetarian whole food source of beta glucans. It really sounds like it's the real deal. It's a great immune support ingredient.
Yes, I think, like I said, I really think that Bioglena is a next generation source of beta glucan. It is vegetarian, like you say, it's whole food, it goes through absolutely no processing, and you get this great ingredient that just really, your body knows what to do. It's evolved for, a very, very long time to do the best that it can. But, every now and again, we all need some support. And therefore, we have Bioglena and beta glucans.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tali. I really appreciate you joining us today to explain the science behind the beta glucans and the Euglena so that our listeners and our watchers can better understand. And of course, you can learn more about Bioglena at barringtonnutritionals.com on our website. Thank you so much for joining us today. Be well.
Thank you for listening.